Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're basically dismantling that really toxic, romanticized myth of the misunderstood genius. And to do it, we're looking at the absolute ultimate historical case study, Leonardo da Vinci. We are going to look at exactly how history's most famous polymath essentially packaged his incredibly complex mind just to secure the most powerful patronage of his entire era.
So, to start us off, here is a brilliant historical mystery for you. Just picture this. It's roughly 1482. You've got a 30-year-old Leonardo da Vinci, wildly, undeniably talented, and he is leaving the cultural epicenter of Florence, heading to Milan. Now, naturally, you'd think he'd lead with his ability to paint absolute masterpieces, right? I mean, he's Leonardo. But actually, no. Instead, he pitches himself primarily as a military engineer, a guy who designs fortifications and weapons. He literally only mentions painting as a total afterthought at the very end. So why on earth did history's greatest painter pitch himself as a military engineer?
Well, the answer comes down to a massive paradigm shift. Leonardo essentially stopped selling his genius and started selling strategic usefulness. He realized something really profound that, honestly, so many incredibly gifted people totally miss today. Vast, deep talents are actually pretty confusing to other people unless they are actively translated. You have to take your complex gifts and attach them to a unifying, highly useful role that directly serves a powerful decision maker. Simply standing there demanding that the market appreciate your depth, yeah, that's a losing strategy.
And this brilliantly illustrates a choice we all have to make between two entirely different mindsets. On one hand, you can be the unrecognized oracle, holding on to that resentment, the romantic isolation of the starving artist, basically grieving that you aren't seen, while stubbornly refusing to translate your work. Or you can adopt the archetype Leonardo chose, the strategic magus. This archetype drops the pride. They package their genius as a concrete answer to their patron's world, translating their gifts to solve immediate, urgent needs for power.
Right, so this brings us to the core of our target archetype, the court polymath. Now, this isn't just someone who happens to be good at a bunch of random things. No, this is a sovereign integrator who attaches their many diverse gifts to one powerful patron's agenda. You see, depth only becomes valuable when you actually take the time to translate it into the language of someone else's immediate ambition, their fear, or even their very survival. Leonardo didn't make himself smaller, he just made himself translatable.
Let's break down how a polymath actually reorders their entire self, because it's fascinating. They don't amputate parts of their identity. Instead, they map it out. They take their inner essence, turn it into concrete artifacts and tools, and then actively step into a patron's worldview, speaking their symbolic language. And finally, they plug that whole package into existing power structures, which, today might be DAOs, venture funds, or startup founders. You're aligning your whole self to the system you're entering.
But to successfully plug into those power structures, you have to understand what actually drives the decision maker. You must identify what we call the patron's two wounds. First step is the urgent fire. These are the immediate existential threats keeping them up at 3 a.m. Second is the legacy hunger, that deep human desire for eternal relevance. To put that in modern terms, think of the urgent fire as making payroll next week or surviving a competitor, and legacy hunger as building an iconic, lasting brand. If you can solve these two deep pains for a specific decision maker, you've achieved true patron fit.
Okay, so how did Leonardo actually pull this off in the real world? Well, he executed a masterful 6-step playbook. He diagnosed closure, selected a target, warmed the door, wrote an incredible pitch letter, entered mutual flourishing, and finally wrote out the long arc. Let's just walk right through these exact moves.
First things first, it is absolutely vital to frame this as a long-term strategy. This was not some overnight growth hack. From facing that initial structural closure in Florence in 1478, it took him over a decade, until 1495 to reach true symbiosis in Milan with massive works like The Last Supper. And the whole thing culminates decades later in 1519 with his immortal legacy in France. This strategy requires years, real patience, and massive dedication to fully play out.
So let's look closer at those initial steps, diagnosis and target selection. Leonardo basically looked around and realized Florence was structurally closed to him. It was completely saturated with Medici influence, and his specific broad stack of talents just didn't fit the live demand there. But here's the genius part. He didn't take this rejection personally. He analytically read that closure as a redirect, not a verdict on his actual worth. So he chose an adjacent ecosystem, Milan, and he targeted its de facto ruler, Ludovico Sforza, simply because Milan was under immense geopolitical pressure and urgently needed the exact military engineering capabilities Leonardo had in his toolkit.
But, and this is crucial, Leonardo didn't just knock on Ludovico's door cold like some desperate job applicant. He warmed the door. He actually arrived in Milan as part of a diplomatic gift from Lorenzo de' Medici. I mean, that is literally the highest status referrer possible in that era. And his icebreaker? A silver lyre that he had crafted himself and could play beautifully. Imagine history's greatest polymath showing up to a military powerhouse with a homemade musical instrument. He established undeniable physical mastery of a craft before he ever handed over a written pitch.
Once that door was warm, Leonardo executed Phase 4, the letter. The structural brilliance of this pitch is just astounding. Remember, he didn't amputate his identity. He just reordered it entirely around Ludovico's specific wounds. He led heavily with the urgent fire, listing out 9 highly tactical points of military engineering, vivid imagery of weapons, bridges, and fortifications. Then, quietly, almost subtly at the end in point 10, he drops the legacy hook, the promise to build a massive bronze horse to immortalize this Forza dynasty. He even offered what we'd call today a freemium pilot program in the patron's park, basically saying, hey, let me prove it to you risk-free.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the exact phrasing Leonardo used in that letter. Aprendo aquella lis secreti mei, which translates to, opening to you my secrets. Notice the framing there. He isn't begging for a job. He is firmly, confidently positioning himself as a highly valuable peer who possesses proprietary craft, and he's actively choosing to share his secrets. It completely flips the power dynamic from a laborer selling time to a sovereign integrator offering a massive strategic advantage. He achieved this brilliant dynamic by utilizing what we can call a court protocol envelope. Leonardo had a deeply unique, undeniably weird mind. That was his sovereign cargo. But he knew you don't punish the patron with your weirdness right at the front door. He wrapped his incredibly bold offer in humilitas, a bold opening paired with a humble closing. He wove his true depth underneath a very legible, court-appropriate format, where his genius could emerge naturally later, once trust was firmly locked in. And once he was inside, this highly calculated entry blossomed into Phase 5, growing the relationship. Over the next 17 years, this shifted from a purely transactional military pitch into profound mutual flourishing. Leonardo began producing things that Ludovico never could have even thought to specify at the door. He painted the patron's beloved Cecilia Gallerani. He created The Last Supper, which instantly became the ultimate prestige work of Ludovico's entire reign. He even designed hydraulic engineering systems that literally drove the region's prosperity for a century.
Now, of course, the execution wasn't completely flawless. There were plenty of surface failures. You know that famous armored cart? The gears were actually designed backwards. The portable bombards mostly just remained drawings. And that ultimate deep hook, the giant bronze horse? Well, the 70 tons of bronze meant for it were eventually repurposed into cannons to fight the French, and the clay model was totally destroyed. But here is the key. Leonardo attempted that horse in absolute, agonizing earnestness. That integrity gate is what kept the relationship from rotting into just another transactional disappointment.
Eventually, when the patronage finally ended, we see Phase 6, the long arc. For Leonardo, the historical payout was just staggering. The sheer breathing room provided by Ludovico allowed him to create the foundational stratum of his world-famous notebooks and paint masterpieces like the Virgin of the Rocks. Milan wasn't just some stepping stone for him. It was the fertile, relational ground that grew him into the integrated polymath archetype of Western civilization, the exact form that all future patrons desperately wanted to commission.
And the payout for the patron? Just as massive. His legacy hunger was completely, eternally healed. In this really beautiful twist of historical irony, the powerful Sforza dynasty effectively passes through history strictly on the shoulders of the artists they hired. I mean, today, historians remember his reign primarily because it produced The Last Supper, and we literally only see his consort Cecilia through Leonardo's eyes.
And that is the concept of true symbiosis. Over 500 years later, this relationship is so deeply intertwined in our historical memory that we can't fully tell where the patron ends and the artist begins. The identity simply became Leonardo of Milan. The city, the patron, and the visionary all folded into one immortal form. It proves that the initial fit at the door was completely honest, because the symbiosis it eventually pointed toward was very, very real.
So, the crucial point is, how do you apply this to your own complex career right now? Well, here is what not to do. Please do not walk into a room selling vague, highly abstract concepts or demanding respect for your genius. Instead, sell strategic advantage. Tell a specific power holder that you can see the hidden architecture of their venture, that you can name their real bottlenecks, and that you can turn their scattered assets into a coherent operating system.
You don't need to make your talents smaller, you just need to make them translatable to the person who holds the resources.
So I want to leave you with a direct challenge. If you have deep, complex talents that feel completely trapped right now, stop raging at the world for not getting it. Instead, ask yourself, who is your Ludovico Sforza? Where is the decision maker who desperately needs your specific stack of skills? And most importantly, what are their two wounds, their urgent fire and their legacy hunger, that only you can solve? Find them, warm the door, and start writing your letter.